It's time now for Perspective, and my guest today is Hannah Weisfeld, director and also a founder of Yachad, which is a British Jewish organisation whose primary goal, according to its own mission statement, is to empower British Jews to support a political resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Hannah, thank you very much for speaking to us today on France 24. Now, your organisation supports a two-state solution, considering where we are now with the death toll soaring in Gaza. The international community increasingly urging Israel to show restraint, and also, of course, Israelis reeling from the 7th of October attacks. Do you still believe a two-state solution is possible?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I mean, I would say that more than ever now, there is no choice. We've seen what a terrible situation has unfolded in the last over 3 weeks now in Israel and in Gaza. And the idea that this conflict can continue to exist with this status quo, which has resulted in this horrendous situation, this terrible loss of life, both in Israel and now in Gaza, there's got to be a different way forward. And I think that we've seen international diplomats now run around the Middle East trying to prevent this conflict from becoming a much, much worse, broader regional conflict. And there is now finally, after so many years of ignoring the status quo, there is finally an understanding that we cannot continue to live like this, that in order for Israel to have safe and secure borders, and in order for the Palestinian people to live in freedom and dignity, there is going to have to be a resolution to this conflict, a political one. It's going to require an awful lot of work, and the international community to stop, frankly, ignoring this and kicking the can down the road. So I would say that even though the situation on the ground today is so horrendous, and the idea that you would even mention the word peace almost seems laughable, quite frankly, there is really no other choice, because the idea that it can continue like this, or that we can continue with the status quo that there was before October the 7th, and then we go back to October the 6th, the day after this fighting ends, that cannot be the outcome now.
And I'd like to just talk for a little while about the situation in Britain right now. We've seen a very few divisive weeks in Britain, as we have across Europe. People often finding themselves on one of two camps, either it seems pro-Hamas or pro-Netanyahu on the other side, whereas, of course, the reality is much more nuanced than that. How do you get away from that binary argument?
Well, I'm really glad you raised that, because I think that's one of the primary roles that we are trying to actually play here. The idea that raising a flag in support of the Palestinian people is supporting Hamas, or expressing sympathy for Israelis who were brutally murdered by Hamas on October the 7th is somehow signalling your support for the actions of an Israeli government you don't agree with, is an absurd binary dichotomy that is really not helping to diffuse tensions here. So people here, feel scared. People here are worried by things they see on the streets. They're nervous for themselves and their own safety, the safety of their children. I think people who have children in Jewish day schools here are worried about their kids getting on public transport and going to school. But I think it's really incumbent upon religious and political leaders to model the idea that actually there are two peoples in this conflict. It's not a conflict of equals, but expressing the fact that both those people need safety, security, protection, dignity does not make you anti one side and pro another side. That we have to inject some kind of empathy into this conversation, where people understand that there are actually human beings on both sides of this border, that fundamentally there may be governments, there may be leaders that you think are doing terrible things and don't deserve support, but there are people that are dying now on both sides. And in order to stop this conflict, I think, from spilling over, and not just in the UK, I know it's been similar in France, we've seen what's happened in Russia in the last 24 hours, to stop this conflict from spilling over and kind of fundamentally rewriting religious and ethnic dividing lines beyond the region, we need people to stand up and say, I stand in support of human beings that are affected by this conflict, and that I will simultaneously call for the protection of human life inside Gaza, whilst also calling to free the hostages that are in the Hamas tunnels inside Gaza. That both of those groups of people are fundamentally innocent civilians that should not be caught up in this conflict and are deserving of support from outside.
It's reported in the Guardian newspaper today that police in London said that 218 anti-Semitic hate crimes had been reported from the 1st to the 18th of October this year. That's more than 13 times more than were reported in the same period last year. What would you say is the atmosphere like for Jews today in Britain?
Look, without a shadow of a doubt, anti-Semitism has significantly spiked. People are absolutely fearful, and I would include myself in that. That, you know, when my oldest daughter goes to our synagogue on a Sunday morning to learn about being a Jew, they're not allowing the kids to play outside at the moment because it's just frankly too dangerous, and it's too unknown how bad the danger is. You know, and that's, you know, as a Jew in Britain, I've never actually felt scared before. This is the first time I have been nervous for myself and for my children. You know, that fear is very, very real. I would say, though, that it's crucially important that, you know, that we put that in a broader context. So I spent this weekend in a synagogue with hundreds of people celebrating the bar mitzvah of close friends of mine. Jewish life continues in this country. And for the people who say there is no future for Jews in Britain, that is fundamentally not true. And it's actually really unhelpful in reducing fear and tension. So I think on the one hand, we have to be very wise and very real to a serious concern and a serious fear that exists in this country. And simultaneously be able to say to people, you know, that there is a future here and that we have to work really hard with people of other faiths now and moving forward to make sure that people feel that they have a place in Britain. You know, Jews feel really unsafe. I know that in the Muslim community, there's real concern about the rise of Islamophobia. And actually, I think it's incumbent on Jews and Muslims together to say no to anti-Semitism, to say no to Islamophobia, and to make sure that people understand that Britain and the United Kingdom is a place in which all faiths are welcome, regardless of what happens outside of this country. That what happens in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories is of great personal concern to a lot of people living in this country. But we are fundamentally British citizens that have to build a secure and fruitful life in Britain. And we need to maintain the fact that this is a place where people of all faiths and background are welcome, regardless of what they may or may not think about the situation on the ground. So I think it is fearful. I think people are scared. I say that myself. But I also am very concerned that there is this, you know, people are kind of overstating the extent to which the future as a Jew or the future as a Muslim in this country is kind of in danger. I think that is not the case, and religious leaders need to stand up and say that.
And what about the government, Hannah? Do you feel that the Jewish community feels sufficiently supported and protected by the current British government?
Yes, there is, without a shadow of a doubt, both the current government and the political opposition in Labour are, you know, hugely mindful of the Jewish community here. They give a huge amount of money into our security and our protection. I think that where there has been a falling away of trust has been between parts of the Jewish community and the police, particularly in London, the Metropolitan Police. And this sense that on some of the demonstrations over the last few weeks in support of Palestinians in Gaza, that anti-Semitism has been allowed to be seen very visibly on the streets. And I want to be really clear that it's absolutely the case that there is some anti-Semitism in those marches, and it's actually very severe anti-Semitism, where people are calling out in support of terror and in support of, you know, very historical kind of anti-Semitic ideas. That said, it's also really important to say that the overwhelming majority of people in this country who are going out onto the streets are doing so in support of the people inside Gaza. And we have to separate the two things. I think it's right to ask the police to call out and police better those elements of those demonstrations where anti-Semitism is heard and seen. But it's really very important for all the reasons that you stated before, that, you know, this kind of binary splitting of society, that we don't bundle people together and say that anybody who goes out on the streets is part of an anti-Semitic mob that doesn't believe that Jews have a right to be in the UK, or believes that what Hamas did on October the 7th is okay. Those people exist. They should be dealt with to the full extent of the law. The rest of society who is concerned by what they see, you know, inside Gaza, should be allowed to go out on the streets and express that in a free and democratic country.
A very important point to end on. Hannah Weisfeld, a director and founder of Yachad. Thank you so much for speaking to us on France 24 today.